drive just northeast of Louisville down Sleepy Hollow Road. Sleepy Hollow Road, which is located just outside of Louisville, Kentucky, and that crosses through Jefferson and Oldham counties, is a narrow forested road winding by lush thickets, old ruins, sparse homesteads, and scenic landmarks. Its length is absolutely saturated in old hill folklore and chilling ghost stories. Historically, lands now holding Louisville were, for thousands of years, inhabited by tribes native to the region, including the Shawnee and Cherokee, who utilized the region for hunting, trade, and for its strategical placement along the Ohio River. Following the arrival of settlers through the locale in 1778, Revolutionary War hero George Rogers Clark would found a city from a budding community around the Louisville area, and would aim to have it serve as a military post and trading hub. The name Louisville itself was actually derived from French King Louis XVI, and following its creation, the city would grow rapidly through the remainder of the 18th century. Through the 19th century, the implementation of steamboats would only further fuel Louisville's population, and much like native tribes before them, locals and traders alike would take advantage of its location along the Ohio as a vital link between the Midwest and the South, transforming it into a key landmark to the regional economy. Through the Civil War, the booming river city would act as a major Union stronghold, solidifying its position through the conflict. And unlike a good bulk of our other southern states, this would actually result in Kentucky never seceding. Following the war, Louisville would evolve from its former heydays as a shipping hub into a center of industry and commerce. In 1875, the Kentucky Derby would grow to become part of the city's cultural identity, and through the remainder of the 19th and early 20th centuries, the locale would welcome a rise in manufacturing and in the establishment of institutions detrimental to the formation of our nation. Into more recent times, while the region has experienced a general decline in its traditional industries, Louisville has welcomed modernization and further cultural development, and today, it stands as a beautiful and sprawling city boasting a vibrant art scene, diverse heritage, rich history, and much, much more. Now, this next part may come as a bit of a shock, but our drive in question, being Sleepy Hollow Road, is actually nearly as old as the city of Louisville itself, and dates all the way back to the early 1800s, when it served as a rural dirt route between local farms and residences through the area. And as Louisville grew, as the automobile prevailed, and as suburban development ensued, eventually it was paved over, offering motorists up into the present a chance to travel what is literally a historic byway, complete with breathtaking scenery and a host of historic points of interest. Chillingly, the whole of this remote stretch is surrounded by a slew of terrifying tales, and those that have traveled its bounds have reported shadowy figures sighted stalking the roadsides, instances of vehicles stalling or refusing to restart, and an unnatural fog that descends upon the area alone. Through the 1970s and 80s, a handful of local reports, which were mainly centered around the nearby Devil's Point and its adjacent section of Sleepy Hollow Road, told of cult sightings and of the discovery of eerie shrines. To date, those who frequent the route still report hearing odd chanting from the woods through their open windows, screams that are believed to originate from sacrificial victims, bonfires surrounded by cloaked figures, and encounters with a host of demonic monstrosities that some believe have been conjured to the region through various magic practices. To make matters worse, many have also documented threatening encounters with a multitude of cryptids, including but not limited to skunk ape, wendigo, skinwalkers, water monsters, and more. One more famous ghost story surrounding Sleepy Hollow tells of a phantom black hearse that's been known to appear and disappear at random. This terrifying vehicle often follows motorists at unnatural speeds, nearly causing accidents before slowly fading out of existence. A final infamous fable concerns the stretch of Sleepy Hollow that crosses Height Creek. Now, as local legend has it, back in the day, this portion of the road held a covered bridge, from which desperate mothers would throw their unwanted children into the waters below, and to their deaths. Today, it's told that when the moon shines upon this very same segment, one can still hear the cries of the lost children, often accompanied by a disturbing wailing sound that's believed to emanate from the restless spirits of their guilt-ridden mothers. Northeast of our last location at the Buffalo Trace Distillery. The Buffalo Trace Distillery, which is located in Frankfort, Kentucky, is a historic complex turned liquor operation that's well recognized for its spirits, which are sold and enjoyed internationally, and its bounds are infamous for a totally different type of spirit. Historically, and incredibly, the company Buffalo Trace actually claims their distillery is the oldest continuously operating distillery in the whole of the United States. And though the Guinness World Record is held by another distillery, being the Burke's Distillery, which produces Maker's Mark and has distilled since 1805, a good deal of credible sources debate this distinction as a technicality. Incidentally, records indicate that the Buffalo Trace site has accommodated distillation since 1775, when Hancock Lee and his brother Willis began their own operation. Subsequently, in 1812, one Benjamin Harrison Blanton would construct a distillery on lands that formerly held the Brothers Project, and in 1870, this distillery was purchased by an Edmund H. Taylor, who formally established the business as the Old Fire Copper Distillery. In 1878, the OFC distillery was sold yet again to a James Stagg, who, in 1886, would install steam heating in the warehouse, marking what was actually the first climate-controlled warehouse for aging whiskey in the country. Now, unlike other distilleries we've touched on in the past, through Prohibition, the OFC was actually allowed to continue production for what was deemed medicinal whiskey, after which it would resume production of standard spirits. In 1972, one Gary Gayhart was named Master Distiller and would remain in said position until his retirement in 2005, when he was succeeded by Harlan Wheatley. Notably, during Gayhart's reign, in 1999, our current Buffalo Trace brand was introduced. More recently, in 2016, the Buffalo Trace Distillery would announce its plans to expand operations under investments in the tune of $200 million. And in March of 2022, the site would disclose its creation of 6-liter OFC vintage bourbon whiskeys, accompanied with NFTs, all of which that were sold as part of the company's mission to raise $2 million for charity. The Buffalo Trace Distillery remains open to this day, offering tastings, an array of events, and touring options of both the historic and paranormal varieties, and rightfully so, as over its very lengthy existence, both staff and guests to its bounds have reported a host of inexplicable activity, including strange noises heard from empty spaces, extreme cold patches felt in hot weather, and odd snippets of long-forgotten conversations captured in recordings and heard through radios or in the backgrounds of phone calls. Across the whole of the property, a number of full-bodied apparitions have been sighted roaming about, and of the more famous of these entities are the manifestations of both E.H. Taylor and Benjamin Harrison Blanton, both of whom are usually observed going about tasks from their lives since past, seemingly tending to their beloved establishment from beyond the grave. Paranormal investigations of the distillery have yielded high EMF levels, crystal clear EVPs, and hits on laser grids, while several researchers have documented contact through devices such as spirit boxes and Ouija boards. Also reported at the Buffalo Trace Distillery are objects sighted moving around on their own, instances of doors and windows opening and closing by themselves, and machinery inexplicably discovered turned on. While disembodied voices and footsteps have been heard from empty rooms, shadowy figures have been spied lurking about, and many describe the constant feeling of being watched, as if they're never truly alone. Our third haunt has us Cave National Park. Mammoth Cave National Park, which is placed primarily out of Edmonson County in Kentucky, is a massive 52,830-acre expanse containing portions of none other than Mammoth Cave, which is actually the longest known cave system in the world, and its bounds are shrouded in both mystery and long-standing stories of the supernatural. Historically, human utilization of the Mammoth Caves isn't a modern concept, and we now know that early tribes native to the region performed various ceremonies, hid, or even stored things within the subterranean world in as early as 5000 to 4000 BCE. Much later, as Europeans settled into the area, it's believed the caves were passed by numerous exploration parties. However, our first physical documentation of the area can be derived from an indenture written around September 10th of 1791 in what was referred to as the Pollard Survey. And just 5 years later, in 1796, it, along with a substantial portion of the Pollard Survey, would be purchased under a British-American merchant by the name of Thomas Lang Jr., before it was lost to a local county tax claim through the War of 1812. Subsequently, a handful of parties would lay claim to the land, and following the earlier Embargo Act of 1807, which prohibited foreign trade, the system's plentiful saltpeter stores would become essential in the production of American gunpowder. In 1838, the whole of the cave lands were purchased under one Franklin Gorin, who would see the system's value as a tourist attraction and who would use his slaves as tour guides while charging admission. Notably, one such enslaved individual by the name of Stephen Bishop, who worked tours from the 1840s through the 1850s, would actually go to great lengths in order to chart the cave, and would create what is considered today the first accurate map of its passageways. While exploration of the caverns continued, the caves would change hands a number of times. From 1842 to 43, one Dr. Krogan would actually run a tuberculosis hospital from within the caverns, until he himself caught the disease and ultimately died to it in 1849. In 1866, some of the first photos of the caves ever were taken under Charles Waldeck, and through the remainder of the century, the Demence's fame would grow rapidly. In 1906, and following the construction of a lock and dam in Brownsville, Mammoth Caves would become accessible by steamboat. Through the early 1920s, and by way of blasting, one George Morrison would create a number of new entrances into the caverns. By May of 1936, 27,402 acres of local land was acquired by the Secretary of Interior, and in 1941, the expanse was declared a national park. Into the present, Mammoth Cave remains open to the public, with tours and various educational materials offered, and the park accommodates somewhere from 500,000 to 1 million visitors annually. Chillingly, the whole of this ancient cavern and its surrounding parklands are shrouded in a number of legends and tales of the inexplicable, and both visitors and officials to its bounds have reported strange hot and cold patches felt in adverse weather conditions, instances of electronics dying even on full batteries, and an odd, disorienting euphoria, almost as if the caves themselves want parkgoers to get lost. Reported across the site are disembodied whispers and footsteps heard through the darkness, instances of personal possessions going missing and turning up later much deeper into the cave, and encounters with shadowy figures that lurk just beyond the light. And a number of eyewitness accounts detail run-ins with full-bodied apparitions of both former slaves and of persons who perished to tuberculosis, and who manifest as sickly and malnourished looking. Some have told of sightings of various cryptids, including Sasquatch-like beasts above ground, and within the caverns, several have described coming across disturbing, pale, hominid creatures that crawl about through the pitch darkness. One more famous apparition on site is that of Floyd Collins, who once owned the connected Crystal Cave. Incidentally, his spirit has been sighted with a lantern in one hand and a notebook in the other, seemingly still studying the dements from beyond the grave. Lastly, but not least, the apparition of the aforementioned Stephen Bishop has been known to appear at random, helping those who are lost, and reports often describe his ghost as a comforting, pleasant presence, or as a light in the darkness. Okay, and Perryville Battlefield. The Perryville Battlefield State Historic Site, which is located within Boyle County in Kentucky, is a historic expanse preserving the site of a significant Civil War confrontation that actually marked the largest battle in the state of Kentucky. And today, its blood-soaked bounds are rumored to harbor countless restless spirits tied to this brutal fight. Historically, the Battle of Perryville would commence on October 8th of 1862, when a force of 55,000 men with the U.S. Army of Ohio under the command of Major General Don Carlos Buell clashed with an opposition of only 16,000 men under the command of Confederate General Braxton Bragg, resulting in 4,276 casualties for the former and 3,401 casualties for the latter, and in a decisive Union victory, though some did consider it a tactical victory for the Confederacy. Following the fight, on the 40th anniversary of the battle in 1902, a Confederate monument was erected in the Confederate Cemetery. In 1931, a U.S. memorial was established nearby, and in 1954, the Perryville State Battlefield site was officiated under the Kentucky State Conservation Commission in order to better preserve this significant expanse. Over the years, the battlefield would welcome a slew of trails, educational additions, and more. And in 1962, on the battle's 100th anniversary, A museum and visitor center were opened as interpretive venues for the site's many guests. Over subsequent years, a total of 2,500 acres in the Perryville area were recognized as a National Historic Landmark, and in 1991, the park would acquire an additional 149 acres of farmland, more than doubling its size at the time. Up into the present, the American Battlefield Trust, partnered with various organizations such as the Office of Kentucky Nature Preserves, have acquired and preserved a total of around 1,202 acres of former battlefield. The area remains open to the public to this day, offering touring options, educational materials, and even reenactments each October. Not surprisingly, the whole of these weathered battlegrounds are associated with countless reports of supernatural activity, and those who have braved their bounds, especially after dark, have reported shadowy figures sighted slinking about, phantom lantern lights spotted in the distance, and what have been described as ethereal fireballs that float in the skies above. Reported across the site and confined to no area alone are ghostly gunshots, screams, shouted commands, and the clash of battle heard without source, and some have detailed instances in which they've stumbled upon entire groups of soldiers engaged in combat that they at first believed to be actors, only to blink and find that these scenes have vanished entirely. Lastly, disembodied hoofbeats have been heard at all hours. Prints without source have been discovered in fresh mud, and several have told of witnessing the silhouettes of countless cavalrymen on the horizon that massively infamous Waverly Hills Sanatorium. The old Waverly Hills Sanatorium in Louisville, Kentucky is a sprawling abandoned institution site widely recognized amongst history buffs, urban explorers, and paranormal investigators. That's bounds, over the years, have played host to countless ghost stories and tales of encounters with the unknown. Historically, in 1883, lands the sanatorium now sits upon were initially purchased under Major Thomas H. Hayes for use in the construction of the Hayes family homestead. However, as this property was a good distance from local schools at the time, he would also construct a one-room schoolhouse on site for his daughters to attend, after which he would hire teacher Lizzie Lee Harris. Incidentally, he left the naming of this school up to Miss Harris, and out of a fondness for Walter Scott's Waverly novels, she would settle on what else but Waverly School. Additionally, after hearing the name and finding it quite peaceful sounding, the Major would decide to name the whole of his property Waverly Hill. Years later, through the early 1900s, Jefferson County would be stricken by a particularly aggressive outbreak of tuberculosis, and because of its location along the Ohio River and its wetlands environment, Louisville was hit especially hard, resulting in 1906 in the forming of a Board of Tuberculosis Hospital, who would immediately begin searching for land appropriate for a long-term treatment facility. Eventually, the board would come across Hayes' property, which, if you'll remember, was a good distance from city limits, making it perfect for the task at hand. The board would purchase this property, and in 1908, ground was broken on what would eventually open in 1910 as the Waverly Hills Sanatorium. Following the initial sanatorium's opening, an increase in TB cases would result in the need for a larger facility. In 1924, construction on a new 5-story brick and concrete institution was started. In 1926, the Waverly we know today would open its doors, and over the following years, the site would grow to become a self-sufficient community with a full farm, laundry facilities, maintenance shops, a butcher, and much, much more. Fortunately, in 1943, the antibiotic streptomycin was created. By 1949, it was being distributed at Waverly. Over time, the sanatorium's population would begin to decrease as TB could be treated in outpatient facilities, and in 1961, the weathered old center was forced to close its doors. In 1962, Waverly would host the Woodhaven Geriatric Center for a time. However, in 1982, sadly, this new institution would be ordered shut down under the state, following an inspection yielding multiple cases of patient abuse. Preceding this geriatric center's closing, a number of investors would purchase Waverly under various intentions. However, all prospective projects would eventually fail, and it wasn't until 2001, when the site was purchased by Tina and Charlie Mattingly, that it would have life breathed into its old bones. Since their purchase, the Mattingleys have established the Waverly Hills Historic Society in an effort to preserve the aging sanatorium. The expanse offers various events, touring options, paranormal investigations, and even an annual haunted house, which we're told can get a little too real at times. Disturbingly, it's estimated that over 60,000 lives were lost within Waverly, and local legend tells the spirits of the deceased might still linger, with both staff and visitors reporting objects that move on their own, doors that open and close by themselves, and shadowy figures spied in the peripheral, and that always dart around corners or disappear when viewed directly. Various high-profile investigations of the sanatorium have yielded high EMF levels, countless EVPs, orbs captured in photography, and hits on laser grids, while others have told of bouts of communication across Ouija boards and spirit boxes. One more famous entity on site is that of a little boy named Timmy, who seems to enjoy both pranking the living and also playing catch with unsuspecting visitors. Eerily, Timmy has been known to roll a ball from darkened corners, terrifying all present, and some even tell that if you bring your own ball onto the property and roll it down various hallways, that Timmy might just roll it back to you. A rather popular story tells that in the sanatorium's earlier days, a nurse took her own life on site by way of hanging. Since this fateful day, her spirit has been sighted all across the property, either hanging from random doorways or lurking the halls, with rope marks around her neck. Lastly, a spectral man in white has been commonly sighted wandering Waverly's many halls at night, and while his identity remains a mystery, some who have been in his presence have mentioned an ominous, almost threatening vibe.